John, thanks for talking to us this evening. So the Trump administration's rhetoric on China is increasing. Is it playing to America's domestic audience ahead of the election or legitimately challenging China's ascendancy in the Pacific?
Yeah, good question, Andrew, and it's doing a bit of both, it appears to me. What we're seeing is a very interesting coincidence that the Philippines government of Rodrigo Duterte, 4 years after the arbitral tribunal ruling on the 12th of July 2016, has announced that they're really pretty unhappy with what China's been doing, and they're finally pushing back. This after 4 years of the Duterte government bending over backwards to accommodate China, to smooth over things and to try and basically befriend China. And China just has not been able to get over itself and make some concessions to the Philippines, to the point where Duterte, it appears, seems to have effectively given up on sweet-talking China. So Mike Pompeo's remarks coincide with that. They also coincide with a series of issues in the South China Sea and further north around the Senkaku Islands, what Japan calls Senkaku, China calls the Diaoyu Islands. But we're seeing an assertiveness from China that's irritated Malaysians, who are very careful about trying to avoid irritating China. They've irritated the Vietnamese, they've irritated the Filipinos, to an extraordinary degree, where Rodrigo Duterte has been really trying hard to try and blow off the American alliance, has had to concede that really the Americans are really the only ones who are going to stand up in support of his interests.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting set of circumstances.
Indeed, and as you said, they're irritating most of those countries in that region. But as far as the Americans are concerned, will that rhetoric be matched by military posturing, do you think? What's the likelihood the US will bolster its presence in the Western Pacific?
Well, that's a good question. We've seen two carrier strike groups operating in the South China Sea recently, so they can sustain a reasonably high operational tempo. But of course, everyone in the neighbourhood's just a little bit nervous about what might happen next. And with the United States being so caught up with many issues, it is very interesting to see that the US administration is pressing on this point right now. And it is, of course, it's a bit ironic because you've got these extraordinary circumstances where China, which has signed up to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, is abrogating it, and the United States, which has not ratified it, has agreed to it, and is actually effectively operating in accordance with the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, but it can't get the Senate to ratify it. And so we've got now this really strange set of circumstances where the exclusive economic zones of the contiguous maritime states of Southeast Asia across and around the South China Sea are all kind of quietly cheering on the United States as Mike Pompeo declares this new, more forthright position about the illegality, and leaning very much back to what the Philippines government has now finally come back to as well, which the previous president, Benigno Aquino, pursued from 2013 to 2016. So just as Aquino won that arbitral tribunal ruling in the favour of the Philippines and in the favour of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which basically said, look, the 9-dash line doesn't count. It simply does not count in international law. And that was a big blow for China. But then Duterte took office, and that seemed to be the point at which China was going to win everything back over. And of course, they've been kind of pretty ham-fisted in the way they've treated the Philippines. So I think John, Pompeo is now coming in, seeing this as a moment for the United States to make a bit of a return.
OK, so that's as far as the Americans are concerned. Is it in Australia's interest to take a tougher stance in the South China Sea, particularly given the current diplomatic conflict between Australia and China?
Yeah, no, it's a tough one because Australia doesn't want to escalate any further. Obviously, we're in a bit of a bind here. We want to support the United States, and we do support the United States. Australian ships have been actively working alongside US Navy ships in the South China Sea. But the question is whether, at the moment, the irony might be that actually a bit more diplomacy from Australia might actually work at this juncture, because one of the things we don't want to do is press China into a corner and humiliate them over this decision. The decision by Duterte, the decision by Mike Pompeo, But if we were, what's really important is for these nations to confer with each other. And interestingly enough, Maurice Payne, the foreign minister, has been doing quite a lot of this, working the room, if you like, doing it, a lot of it on video conferencing as well, to an extent not really seen in diplomacy in a long time, if ever. So this working the networks, working relationships to try and find a common ground that will present a position to China that is not about humiliating them, not about pushing them into a corner and providing them with an out, but at the same time not making too many concessions. And that's, I think, where Australia's trying to position itself at the moment.
Professor John Blaxland from the Strategic and Defence Studies Centre, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.